I said. "Get on the ground now." The sound of Maya Williams' head hitting the metal boarding counter echoed through Terminal 5 like a gunshot. Officer Derek Palmer's forearm crushed against her neck, pinning her against the jagged edge, while dozens of passengers gasped in horror. Phones rose instantly, capturing every brutal second as the woman in the gray Harvard hoodie struggled to breathe under his weight. Palmer grinned with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was protecting society from another fraudster trying to sneak into first class. His grip tightened as he felt her body go, still confident that he had neutralized the threat. He had no idea that the woman currently gasping for air beneath his boot was Maya Williams, Chief Legal Counsel for Skylink Airlines. She wasn't just a passenger trying to board Flight 812 to Los Angeles. She was the woman who wrote the protocols, signed the paychecks, and held the legal authority to destroy everything he had ever worked for. In exactly 7 minutes, Officer Derek Palmer would wish he had never been born. Before we dive into this story that will restore your faith in justice, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if this moment of injustice stops you cold the way it did everyone in that terminal, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what happens next proves that sometimes karma wears a badge and justice wears a hoodie. The headache had started somewhere over the Atlantic, a dull throb behind Maya's eyes that usually signaled dehydration, or in this case, the end of a 72-hour negotiation marathon. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather duffel bag, a vintage piece that cost more than most people's cars, though it looked like something rescued from a garage sale, and sighed deeply. Maya wasn't dressed like the chief legal counsel of a multi-billion-dollar airline conglomerate. She was dressed like a woman who had just spent 3 days in a windowless London boardroom, fighting off a hostile takeover that would have cost 12,000 employees their jobs. She wore an oversized gray hoodie from her alma mater, Harvard faded black yoga pants, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her natural hair was pulled back in a messy, no-nonsense bun, and she wore zero makeup. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired graduate student, or perhaps a weary mother heading home. To the trained eye of certain airport staff, however, she apparently looked like a problem waiting to happen. The boarding area for Skylink Airlines Flight 812 was pure chaos. The holiday rush had transformed JFK's Terminal 5 into a zoo of stressed families crying infants and business travelers barking orders into their phones. Maya just wanted to reach Seat 1. Drink a glass of champagne and pass out until the wheels touched the tarmac at LAX. She had earned that first-class seat, not just because she could afford it, but because she had just saved her company from a $2.8 billion acquisition that would have stripped it for parts. The ink on the victory was still drying on contracts in her bag, but all she wanted now was silence and space to decompress. Maya bypassed the snaking economy line, stepping confidently under the red velvet rope marked Skylink Elite First Class Priority Boarding. She had done this hundreds of times before. Her VIP status should have flagged her account the moment she approached the gate. The system should have recognized her name. The agent should have smiled and welcomed her aboard. None of that happened. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was sharp nasal and dripping with barely concealed irritation. Maya paused, turning her head slowly. The gate agent, whose name tag read Jessica Martinez, was glaring at her over the rim of wire-framed glasses. Jessica had the kind of precise haircut that suggested she demanded to speak to managers on her days off, and a posture that screamed petty authority being flexed for the first time. "The economy line is back there," Jessica said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward the mass of humanity snaking behind the stanchions. She didn't check a passenger manifest. She didn't ask for a boarding pass. She didn't even pretend to look at Maya's phone. She simply pointed as if directing traffic around an obstruction. Maya took a deep breath, summoning the patience she usually reserved for stubborn board members and hostile opposing counsel. The exhaustion from 3 days of legal warfare weighed on her shoulders, but she kept her voice level and professional. I know where economy boarding is, Jessica. I'm boarding first class. Jessica let out a short, derisive scoff that was loud enough for passengers in the front of the economy line to hear. A few people snickered, enjoying the free entertainment. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that something interesting was about to unfold. First class is for ticketed passengers. Sweetheart? Jessica said, her voice dropping to that patronizing tone adults use when correcting toddlers who have wandered into spaces they don't belong. And the priority lane is exclusively for our Skylink elite members. You need to step back, wait for your boarding group, and board with everyone else in Zone 5. The dismissal was clear, final, and delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from someone drunk on the tiny bit of power their position provides. Jessica had made her judgment based on a 3-second visual assessment, and in her mind, the case was closed. Maya stepped forward, calmly pulling her iPhone from her hoodie pocket to display her digital boarding pass. The screen showed her seat assignment, clearly 1A, First Class Skylink Elite Diamond status. I am ticketed for seat 1A, and I'd appreciate it if you would scan this boarding pass so I can sit down, Maya said evenly, extending her phone toward the scanner. Her voice carried the kind of calm authority that comes from years of high-stakes negotiations. But Jessica didn't recognize it. She was too busy staring at the hoodie. Jessica didn't even glance at the phone screen. Instead, she looked Maya up and down again, taking in the casual clothes, the scuffed sneakers, and the tired expression of someone who had been traveling for 18 hours. Then she looked Maya directly in the eye with a smirk that was pure, unadulterated bias wrapped in corporate policy. I'm not scanning that, Jessica declared, crossing her arms defensively. We've had a lot of issues lately with fraudulent digital boarding passes, people buying screenshots off the dark web trying to sneak into premium cabins. You don't fit the profile for seat 1A. The profile. Maya felt the temperature in her blood drop 10 degrees. She knew that phrase intimately. She had written memos explicitly forbidding racial profiling 3 years ago after the incident in Chicago that had cost Skylink $4.2 million in settlements. She had personally fired the VP of operations for using that exact logic to deny boarding to a federal judge. The phrase profile was supposed to be banned from Skylink vocabulary, yet here was an employee using it as casually as discussing the weather. The profile, Maya repeated, her voice remaining dangerously calm despite the fire building behind her eyes. And exactly what profile would that be? Jessica. The challenge hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon, and Maya could see Jessica's confidence waver for just a moment before her defensive walls slammed back into place. The one that says a black woman in a hoodie can't afford a $6,000 seat. Jessica snapped back, her face flushing pink with the indignation of someone who had been caught saying the quiet part out loud. Don't try to make this about race. It's about standards. We have protocols to follow. Maya's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something cold and calculating that would have made Jessica very nervous if she had been smart enough to recognize it. Maya had heard these exact words before, not as an adult with power and resources, but as a 16-year-old girl watching her father get pulled from their car during a routine traffic stop that ended with him face down on hot asphalt, an officer's knee pressing into his back until he stopped breathing. That was 26 years ago in Detroit when Maya was just a kid with big dreams and a father who worked 2 jobs to keep her in advanced placement classes. Before Harvard Law School, before the corner office, before she became the kind of person who could make problems disappear with a single phone call. But the memory of helplessness of watching injustice unfold while bystanders looked away had never left her. It was that memory that kept her voice steady now, even as Jessica's words hit like physical blows. That policy was revoked in 2021, Maya said, reciting the employee handbook from memory. Section 4, paragraph 2 states that paying passengers are not subject to appearance-based boarding restrictions unless their attire is explicitly lewd or offensive. My Harvard hoodie qualifies as neither. Jessica's eyes narrowed. She didn't like being quoted policy by someone she had already decided was beneath her station. She didn't like the way this woman spoke with the confidence of someone who actually knew what she was talking about. Most importantly, she didn't like being challenged in front of the growing crowd of passengers who were now openly watching the confrontation. "I don't care what you think the policy says," Jessica retorted, reaching for the desk phone with theatrical urgency. "I'm calling security. You're disrupting the boarding process and making other passengers uncomfortable." The irony wasn't lost on Maya that Jessica claimed other passengers were uncomfortable, while those same passengers were now recording the conversation with obvious interest. But Maya had learned long ago that people like Jessica lived in a reality where their comfort mattered more than other people's dignity. "Scan the boarding pass," Jessica Maya said, stepping closer to the counter but keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. She knew this dance. She had studied it in law school, litigated it in federal court, and watched it play out in security footage that ended careers and cost companies millions. "The system will verify my identity and we can both move on with our day." Back away from my desk, Jessica shrieked, playing to the crowd now with the kind of performance anxiety that comes from someone who knows they're being filmed. "You're acting aggressively. I feel threatened." It was pure theater, and Maya recognized it immediately. She had seen this script 1,000 times in depositions and court filings. The aggressor paints themselves as the victim. The person seeking basic service becomes the danger. The one with power claims to be powerless. But this wasn't a courtroom where Maya could object to leading questions or present evidence of bias. This was Gate B12, and the heavy footsteps approaching from behind told Maya that the situation was about to spiral completely out of control. Officer Derek Palmer had been patrolling Terminal 5 for the better part of his shift, hoping something interesting would happen. At 38 years old and 15 years into his law enforcement career, Palmer was the kind of cop who had joined the force because he enjoyed the authority more than the service. He had accumulated 8 excessive force complaints in his personnel file, but the union had helped him beat every single one. He was currently facing a divorce that would cost him half his pension, child support payments that ate up most of his paycheck, and gambling debts that kept him awake at night. What Palmer needed was an easy arrest that would look good on his monthly report and maybe impress his supervisor enough to forget about his recent performance issues. When Jessica's call came over the radio about an aggressive passenger refusing to follow boarding instructions, Palmer saw opportunity. He approached Gate B12, expecting to find the usual scenario entitled "Passenger Making a Scene, Quick Resolution Through Intimidation," maybe some applause from grateful travelers. What he saw instead was a black woman in casual clothes standing at the first-class boarding counter, while a gate agent pointed at her like she was some kind of contamination. Palmer didn't see a Harvard law graduate who had just spent 72 hours preventing a hostile corporate takeover. He didn't see the Chief Legal Counsel of the airline whose uniform he wore contractor patches for. He didn't see a human being deserving of basic dignity and respect. He saw a target. "Is there a problem here?" Jessica Palmer's voice was deep and authoritative, carrying the promise of violence that came from years of using his size to end conversations before they started. He stood 6'3" and weighed 240 with the kind of thick neck and barrel chest that suggested he spent his off hours in a gym preparing for confrontations exactly like this one. Palmer positioned himself so that Maya would have to turn her back to Jessica to face him directly, a tactical choice designed to make her feel surrounded and isolated. His thumbs were hooked into his tactical vest, and his right hand rested casually near the taser on his belt. "She's refusing to follow instructions," Officer Jessica said, her voice suddenly trembling with what sounded like genuine fear, but was really just adrenaline from having backup arrive. "She tried to force her way onto the aircraft without proper documentation, and now she's being aggressive towards staff." The lie was so smooth and practiced that Maya almost admired its efficiency. In 3 sentences, Jessica had transformed a customer requesting service into a criminal suspect worthy of arrest. She had turned Maya's request to scan a boarding pass into forced entry. She had made Maya's calm responses sound like threats. Palmer turned his attention to Maya, looking her up and down with the kind of assessment cops make when deciding how much force a situation requires. He saw the hoodie, the sneakers, the tired expression, and the way she held herself with quiet confidence despite being obviously outnumbered. In Palmer's experience, people who stayed calm in situations like this were either very smart or very dangerous, and either way, they needed to be controlled quickly. "All right," Palmer grunted, stepping into Maya's personal space with the casual aggression of someone accustomed to using intimidation as a first resort. "Grab your bag and walk away. You're done here." Maya didn't move. She stood her ground with her feet shoulder-width apart, and her hands, clearly visible, positioned in the non-threatening posture she had learned from watching too many encounters exactly like this one go wrong. She knew the script as well as Palmer did, but she also knew something he didn't. Every word, every gesture, every moment of this encounter was being recorded by at least a dozen phones, and some of those phones belonged to people with large social media followings. "I have a valid boarding pass for this flight," Maya said, clearly projecting her voice to ensure the growing crowd of onlookers could hear every word. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger. I have not raised my voice, made any threats, or violated any airport regulations. I'm simply asking to board the flight that I paid for." The response was calm, factual, and delivered with the kind of clarity that comes from someone who has spent years making arguments in front of hostile audiences. But Palmer wasn't interested in facts or arguments. He was interested in compliance, and Maya's refusal to be intimidated represented a direct challenge to his authority. "I don't care what you paid for," Palmer sneered, moving even closer so that his chest was almost touching Maya's shoulder. "The gate agent says you leave, so you leave. This is private property and you're trespassing." "Actually," Maya replied, her legal mind automatically correcting the misstatement even as she recognized the danger of appearing too knowledgeable. "The terminal operates under Port Authority jurisdiction, but Skylink aircraft are private property, and Skylink's contract of carriage states that passengers can only be denied boarding for safety reasons, intoxication, or overbooking situations. I represent none of those categories." The correction hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya immediately realized she had made a tactical error. Palmer's eyes narrowed as he processed what she had just said. Most people didn't know the legal distinction between airport authority and airline property. Most people definitely didn't quote contracts of carriage from memory. "You some kind of lawyer or something?" Palmer asked mockingly, but there was a new edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "Something like that," Maya replied evenly, sensing that the conversation had reached a tipping point. Palmer's face hardened. "Well, counselor," he spat the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. "You're about to get a lesson in street law. Turn around and walk away or you're leaving here in handcuffs. Your choice." Maya looked directly into Palmer's eyes, seeing the anger and frustration that drove men like him to use force as a first response to problems that required patience and intelligence to solve. She thought about her father who had tried to de-escalate a similar situation 26 years ago and paid for it with his life. She thought about all the people who didn't have her resources, her knowledge, or her connections who faced this kind of treatment every day with no recourse and no witnesses. "If you arrest me without cause, Officer Palmer," Maya said, reading his name badge and speaking quietly enough that only he could hear, "it will be the biggest mistake of your career. I'm asking you, one professional to another, to check my identification and verify my boarding pass before you do something that can't be undone." It was the wrong thing to say. Palmer didn't want to hear reason. He wanted submission. Maya's calm confidence in the face of his intimidation wasn't just defiance. It was emasculation. Her suggestion that he check identification wasn't helpful advice. It was an insult to his judgment. Her warning about career consequences wasn't concern for his welfare. It was a threat to his authority. and Derek Palmer had never responded well to threats. "That's it," Palmer barked loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. "You just threatened a police officer." The accusation was completely false, but Palmer delivered it with the kind of conviction that comes from years of practice twisting conversations to justify predetermined outcomes. Maya's attempt at professional courtesy became insubordination. Her calm warning became a threat. Her request for basic procedure became resistance. Palmer reached out and grabbed Maya's left arm, not to escort her gently but to clamp down with enough force to leave bruises. His fingers dug into the soft tissue just above her elbow, applying pressure designed to cause pain and compliance. This wasn't an arrest technique. This was a dominance display. "Hey." A man in an expensive business suit stepped forward from the boarding line. His name tag identified him as David Torres, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "She didn't threaten anyone. She just asked you to check her boarding pass. Back off," Palmer yelled at the bystander, his hand immediately moving toward the taser on his belt. "Interfere with a police investigation, and you'll be next in line for obstruction charges." The threat had its intended effect. Torres and several other passengers who had been moving closer to intervene suddenly stepped back, their phones still recording but their bodies seeking safety. Maya noted their retreat with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. She knew that most people weren't prepared to put themselves at legal or physical risk to help a stranger, but she had hoped that the obvious injustice of the situation might inspire someone to act. Instead, she was on her own. Palmer twisted Maya's arm behind her back with practiced efficiency, applying just enough torque to send shooting pain up to her shoulder without causing the kind of obvious injury that would show up clearly on phone cameras. The move was designed to force compliance through pain while maintaining the appearance of standard police procedure. "I am not resisting," Maya announced loudly and clearly, ensuring her words would be captured by the dozens of phones now recording the encounter. "I am complying with Officer Palmer's instructions. Badge number 4922 is applying excessive force to a compliant passenger." Palmer's grip tightened in response to Maya's clinical documentation of his actions. "Shut up," he growled in her ear, but Maya continued speaking to the cameras. "Officer Palmer has refused to check my identification or boarding pass. He has made no attempt to verify my ticket through proper airline channels. He is arresting me solely based on the complaint of a gate agent who admits she profiled me based on my appearance." "I said, shut up!" Palmer shoved Maya forward, causing her to stumble toward the metal podium of the gate desk. Instead of allowing her to steady herself, he used her momentum to slam her chest first against the counter, driving the air from her lungs. The impact echoed through the terminal like a gunshot, and the crowd gasped in collective horror. Several passengers cried out in protest, but none moved to intervene. Maya's cheek was pressed against the cold metal surface, and she could taste blood where her lip had split against the edge. But Maya's legal mind was still working, cataloging every violation, every witness, every piece of evidence that would matter in the lawsuit that was already forming in her head. Palmer had just committed assault and battery on camera in front of dozens of witnesses against a passenger who had committed no crime and posed no threat. He was digging his own grave, and Maya was going to help him finish the job. "Check her bag." Palmer ordered Jessica, who was now standing behind the counter with a smug satisfaction that made Maya's stomach turn. "Let's see what else she's trying to steal." "You have no probable cause to search my property without a warrant," Maya managed to say, despite the pressure on her back making it difficult to breathe. "This is an illegal search in violation of the Fourth Amendment." "I said shut up." Palmer kicked Maya's legs apart, spreading them wide in the humiliating position that police used to assert complete dominance over a suspect. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, trespassing, and resisting arrest." The charges were complete fabrication, and everyone watching knew it. Maya had been calm, polite, and cooperative from the moment she approached the gate. She had made no threats, committed no crimes, and offered no resistance to Palmer's increasingly violent demands. But Palmer needed to justify his actions retroactively, and lying about the charges was easier than admitting he had assaulted an innocent passenger. Jessica grabbed Maya's vintage leather duffel bag with obvious relish, finally having the opportunity to vindicate her initial assessment. She didn't treat Maya's belongings with the respect due to any passenger's personal property. Instead, she unzipped the bag with theatrical flourish and upended it right there on the dirty airport carpet. Clothes spilled out across the floor, personal items scattered under chairs and between the legs of staring passengers. A toiletry bag broke open, sending bottles rolling in different directions. And then from the bottom of the bag came the items that would change everything. A thick blue folder marked Confidential, Merger Acquisition, Eyes Only, and a high-security laptop computer with Skylink Airlines logo etched in silver on the lid. Jessica kicked the folder with the toe of her shoe, laughing with genuine delight. "Look at this," she announced to the watching crowd. "She probably stole this from some businessman's office." Merger acquisition? Yeah, right. Like she would know what any of that means. Maya closed her eyes, listening to Jessica dig the hole deeper with every word. They were so focused on humiliating her that they weren't paying attention to what they were actually finding. The laptop alone should have been enough to make Jessica pause. It was clearly expensive military-grade secure and bore the Skylink logo prominently. The folder was thick with legal documents all bearing Maya's name and signature. But Jessica was too intoxicated by the opportunity to prove her point to notice the evidence that she was catastrophically wrong. "Ooh, look at this." Jessica continued holding up a prescription bottle she had found in the toiletry bag. She shook it like a maraca. Oxycodone. "I bet she doesn't have a prescription for this either. I tore my ACL skiing in Aspen 2 months ago," Maya said through gritted teeth, her voice strained by Palmer's weight pressing down on her back. "The prescription is in my name. Read the bottle before you embarrass yourself further." Jessica squinted at the orange plastic bottle, and her smirk faltered slightly when she saw that it was indeed prescribed to Maya Williams. But she wasn't ready to give up her moment of triumph. "Could be a fake label," Jessica said, though her voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. "People do that all the time." Without ceremony, she tossed the bottle aside and it skittered across the floor, pills scattering under passenger seats and into corners where they would be lost forever. That is destruction of evidence and denial of necessary medication. Maya catalogued verbally, her lawyer's training taking over even as her body remained pinned to the counter. This is being documented by multiple witnesses and recorded on numerous devices. Palmer pressed harder, wanting to shut her up, but Maya's clinical recitation of legal violations was serving two purposes. It was creating a record for the inevitable lawsuit, and it was making the watching passengers increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "What's this?" Palmer asked, looking over his shoulder as Jessica pulled the laptop from the scattered belongings. "Some kind of computer," Jessica replied, holding the device like it might explode. "Looks expensive. Probably stolen." The laptop was indeed expensive. A ultra-secure military-grade encrypted device issued only to senior executives at Skylink Airlines. It had a biometric scanner, a GPS tracking system, and security protocols that would make a Pentagon contractor jealous. The Skylink logo was etched prominently on the silver lid right next to a serial number and a red warning sticker that read, "Property of Skylink Airlines Legal Department. If found, call immediately." But Jessica was so committed to her narrative of Maya as a criminal that she couldn't process evidence that contradicted her assumptions. "She definitely stole this," Jessica announced with authority born of ignorance. "This is corporate property. Look, it says legal department right on it. She probably grabbed it while cleaning offices or something." "That proves it," Palmer said, feeling vindicated in his decision to arrest first and ask questions later. "Grand larceny. Corporate theft. Good catch, Jessica." Maya finally laughed. It was a dry, dark sound that made Palmer pause in his celebration. Even with her face pressed against cold metal and her shoulders screaming in pain, Maya found genuine amusement in their complete inability to recognize what they were looking at. "Why are you laughing?" Palmer demanded, twisting Maya's wrist harder in irritation. "I'm laughing," Maya said, turning her head as much as Palmer's grip would allow, "because you two are the most incompetent security team I have ever had the displeasure of encountering in 20 years of air travel." The insult hit Palmer like a slap. He was used to fear respect, or at least sullen compliance, from his arrestees. Laughter was something entirely new, and it unsettled him in a way that threats or resistance never could. "You think this is funny?" Palmer growled. "You're looking at serious federal charges for theft of corporate property. You're holding a device?" Maya continued calmly, "That requires both a retina scan and a 20-character password to access, a device that has been GPS tracked since the moment you mishandled it, a device that automatically alerts Skylink airline security whenever it's improperly handled or separated from its authorized user." Palmer's confidence wavered slightly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Maya asked. "That laptop has been sending distress signals to corporate security for the past 3 minutes. They know exactly where it is, who's handling it, and what's happening to it. In fact, I'd be surprised if they weren't already on their way down here." As if summoned by her words, the laptop began emitting a loud, piercing chirp. A red light on the side started flashing rhythmically. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the terminal like an alarm, and passengers began looking around nervously. "Make it stop," Jessica said, panic creeping into her voice. "What is that? Is it going to explode?" "It's a remote security protocol," Maya explained with satisfaction. "The laptop has detected unauthorized access attempts and activated its tracking beacon. Corporate security is now receiving real-time updates on its location and status." Palmer looked at the flashing device, then at Jessica, then back at Maya. For the first time since the encounter began, doubt crept into his expression. But he was too committed to the arrest to back down now, even if warning signs were starting to flash in his head. "I don't care about your fancy computer," Palmer said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You're still under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "Am I?" Maya asked. "Because I haven't seen my identification yet." "You've arrested me without checking my ticket, my ID, or my boarding pass. You've relied entirely on the word of a gate agent who admits she profiled me based on my appearance. That's not police work, Officer Palmer. That's prejudice with a badge." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Palmer could feel the weight of the watching crowd's attention. Phones were still recording, passengers were still staring, and somewhere in the crowd people were starting to whisper that maybe this had gone too far. But Palmer was trapped now by his own choices. He couldn't release Maya without admitting he had been wrong. He couldn't check her identification without acknowledging that he should have done so from the beginning. And he couldn't back down without losing face in front of dozens of witnesses. So he doubled down. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Palmer ordered, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "You're coming with me." Maya felt the cold metal circle her wrists with a click that sounded like destiny snapping into place. She was officially under arrest, detained against her will, separated from her property, and humiliated in front of a crowd of strangers. In the eyes of airport security, she was now a criminal. But in her own mind, Maya Williams was something else entirely. She was a lawyer who had just watched her opponents make every possible mistake in front of a jury of camera phones. And she was about to turn their incompetence into the most expensive lesson of their careers. "This is insane." The voice cut through the terminal noise like a blade. Elena Vasquez, 24 years old with perfectly styled dark hair and wearing designer jeans, had been recording the entire encounter on her phone while providing live commentary to her 50,000 TikTok followers. "Are you guys seeing this?" Elena spoke directly into her camera while maintaining perfect selfie lighting. They just arrested a woman for trying to board her own flight. This is happening right now at JFK Terminal 5, and I can't believe what I'm watching. Elena wasn't just another passenger with a camera phone. She was a rising social media influencer who specialized in travel content and had built her following by documenting both the glamorous and problematic sides of modern air travel. Her videos regularly pulled in hundreds of thousands of views, and her audience trusted her to show them the unfiltered reality behind the scenes. "Guys, I've been traveling for work for 3 years and I have never seen anything like this," Elena continued, keeping her voice low but ensuring her phone's microphone picked up every word. "This woman has been calm and polite this entire time. She asked to board the plane, they said no, and now she's in handcuffs. The gate agent literally said she doesn't fit the profile for first class." Elena's phone screen showed the viewer count climbing rapidly, 1,200 watching live, then 2,800, then 5,400. Comments were flooding in faster than she could read them, and the chat was exploding with fire emojis and shocked face reactions. "Wait. Hold on," Elena whispered to her camera as she zoomed in on Palmer, checking Maya's identification. "They're finally looking at her ID. This is what they should have done 20 minutes ago instead of wrestling her to the ground." But Elena wasn't the only one documenting the incident. David Torres, the businessman who had tried to intervene earlier, was recording everything on his iPad while making a phone call to someone at his law firm. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a physician traveling to a medical conference, had been live streaming the encounter on Instagram to document what she called unconscionable treatment of a fellow traveler. Most significantly, Marcus Rivera, an investigative journalist for the New York Times, who had been traveling incognito while working on a story about airport security overreach, had captured the entire incident from start to finish on professional recording equipment. The viral moment had begun the instant Palmer slammed Maya against the counter, but it reached critical mass when Elena's TikTok audience started sharing her live stream across multiple platforms. Within minutes, clips of the arrest were spreading across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Local news stations monitoring social media feeds for breaking stories had picked up the stream and were already dispatching camera crews to JFK. "Oh my God, guys," Elena breathed into her phone as she watched Palmer finally examine Maya's wallet. His face just went completely white. I think he found something he wasn't expecting. The chat on Elena's live stream was moving so fast it was impossible to follow individual comments, but certain phrases kept appearing over and over. "Sue them, police brutality, racial profiling, and get her justice." Elena's follower count was climbing in real time as word of the dramatic airport confrontation spread across the platform. What had started as a travel delay story was becoming a civil rights incident broadcast live to a global audience. "Wait. Something's happening," Elena whispered, moving closer while trying to stay out of Palmer's line of sight. "The cop looks like he's about to throw up. And now there's another guy coming out of the plane in a really expensive suit." Michael Brooks, CEO of Skylink Airlines, emerged from the jet bridge looking like a man who had just received the worst phone call of his career. His executive assistant had alerted him that their chief legal counsel's company laptop was sending distress signals from somewhere in the terminal, and the GPS coordinates led directly to gate B12. Brooks was dressed in a custom Italian suit that cost more than Palmer made in 2 months, and his expression carried the barely controlled fury of a man watching his company's reputation self-destruct in real time. He had built Skylink from a regional carrier into a major airline over 15 years, and he was not about to let the ignorance and bias of contracted security personnel destroy everything he had worked to create. "This is about to get very interesting," Elena told her audience as Brooks strode purposefully toward the gate counter. "That's definitely someone important. Designer suit, Rolex watch, and he looks angry enough to fire everyone in this terminal." Elena's live viewer count had now topped 15,000 and was still climbing. News outlets were beginning to pick up her stream and embed it in their own breaking news coverage. The hashtag JFKArrest was trending on Twitter, and the phrase hoodie, while black, was spreading across multiple platforms as people shared their own stories of discrimination. But Elena wasn't the only influencer broadcasting the incident. Marcus Chen, a travel blogger with 200,000 YouTube subscribers, had been recording from a different angle and was providing his own real-time commentary about airport security procedures and passenger rights. Dr. Mitchell was using her medical credentials to point out potential injuries Maya had sustained during the arrest. The convergence of multiple content creators with different audiences meant that the incident was being broadcast simultaneously to diverse demographics across multiple platforms. Elena's young, fashion-forward audience was sharing clips to TikTok and Instagram stories. Marcus's travel-focused viewers were discussing the implications on Twitter and travel forums. Dr. Mitchell's medical colleagues were analyzing the force used in the arrest on LinkedIn and medical social networks. Within 30 minutes of Palmer's initial contact with Maya, video clips of the incident had been viewed more than 100,000 times across all platforms. Local news stations were breaking into regular programming to discuss the developing story. Airport officials were being contacted for comment by journalists who had learned about the incident through social media rather than official channels. "Guys, I'm literally shaking," Elena told her audience as she watched Brooks approach Palmer with obvious authority. "Whatever is about to happen, it's going to be huge. The woman they arrested might actually be someone really important. And if that's true, the security people are about to learn why you never judge someone by their clothes." Elena wasn't wrong. The combination of Palmer's excessive force, Jessica's explicit racial profiling, and Maya's actual identity was about to create a perfect storm of accountability that would be impossible for anyone to ignore or cover up. The viral documentation had already ensured that this incident would have consequences far beyond Gate B12. Maya's arrest was no longer just a local dispute between a passenger and airport security. It had become a national conversation about bias, power, and justice that was being watched by hundreds of thousands of people in real time. And Maya Williams, still handcuffed and pressed against a metal counter, was about to become the most vindicated woman in aviation history. "Wait," Elena whispered to her camera, her eyes widening as she caught a glimpse of the ID card Palmer was examining. "I think I can see what's on her badge. Guys, this woman might actually work for the airline, like she might actually be their boss or something." Elena zoomed in with her camera, trying to get a better view of the corporate identification card that had drained all color from Palmer's face. Her audience was now approaching 20,000 live viewers, and the comments section was moving so fast with speculation and outrage that it was just a blur of digital noise. "If this woman really is who I think she is," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who realized she was witnessing something historically significant, "then we just watched two people destroy their entire careers on live television." The viral moment was complete. The documentation was comprehensive, and Maya Williams was about to teach the world a master class in how quiet dignity defeats prejudice, even when justice wears handcuffs and bias carries a badge. Palmer's hands trembled as he held Maya's corporate identification card, reading and rereading the words that were about to end his career. The plastic felt warm between his fingers, and the holographic security features caught the terminal's fluorescent lights in a way that confirmed this wasn't some elaborate fake document. "What does it say?" Jessica demanded from behind the counter, her voice high and tight with the first hints of genuine panic. She could see Palmer's expression had shifted from confidence to something approaching nausea, but she couldn't read the ID card from her position. Palmer's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The words on the card were clear enough. Skylink Airlines, Maya Williams, Chief Legal Counsel, Executive Board Member, Security Clearance Level 5, Unrestricted Access. Below Maya's professional headshot was a signature that matched the one on her driver's license, along with a QR code and magnetic strip that would grant her access to virtually every secure area of any Skylink facility in the world. Read it? Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the handcuffs and the throbbing in her shoulder where Palmer's grip had left angry bruises. Read my title out loud so everyone can hear exactly who you just assaulted. Palmer looked down at Maya, then at the growing crowd of passengers recording everything on their phones, then back at the ID card that was destroying his understanding of reality. The woman he had assumed was some kind of criminal trying to sneak into first class was actually the person who wrote airline security protocols. The person whose laptop he had allowed to be mishandled was the executive who negotiated law enforcement contracts with the Port Authority. The person whose medication Jessica had destroyed was the lawyer who could end both of their careers with a single phone call. Palmer started, then stopped. His voice cracked like a teenager's. Louder, Maya commanded, and there was steel in her voice now that cut through Palmer's confusion and reached the part of his brain that understood he was standing on the edge of a very deep cliff. It says... Palmer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Chief Legal Counsel. And what else Maya pressed. Executive Board Member Palmer mumbled, barely audible. I want everyone in this terminal to hear you, Maya said, projecting her voice with the authority of someone who had argued cases in federal court and cross-examined CEOs in hostile depositions. What is my name? What is my title? And what company do I work for? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crying baby in the economy line seemed to pause. Palmer looked around at the dozens of phones pointed at him, the live streams broadcasting his humiliation to thousands of viewers. The business travelers and tourists and airline employees all waiting to hear him admit the magnitude of his mistake. Maya Williams. Palmer said, his voice carrying across the terminal like a confession. Chief Legal Counsel, Skylink Airlines Executive Board Member. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps echoed through the boarding area. Someone in the back shouted, "Oh my God!" Elena's TikTok chat exploded with fire emojis and shocked reactions. Several passengers immediately started making phone calls, presumably to share news of what they had just witnessed. But the most dramatic reaction came from Jessica, who dropped Maya's laptop like it had suddenly burst into flames. "That's impossible," Jessica stammered, backing away from the counter as if distance could somehow undo the previous 30 minutes. "She's lying. She forged those documents. She doesn't look like what Maya interrupted, finally turning to face Jessica directly, even handcuffed, even with her hair disheveled and her lip bleeding. Maya commanded the space around her with an authority that made everyone in the terminal understand exactly who was really in control of this situation. "Say it, Jessica," Maya continued. "Finish your sentence. I don't look like what a lawyer, an executive, a human being deserving of basic respect." Jessica's face flushed red, then white, then red again as she realized the magnitude of her error. She had built her entire justification for denying Maya service on the assumption that black women in hoodies couldn't possibly belong in first class, and now she was face to face with evidence that her prejudice had led her to humiliate her own company's senior leadership. I didn't know," Jessica whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Maya replied, her voice cutting through Jessica's attempt at self-pity. "You didn't check my boarding pass. You didn't scan my ticket. You didn't ask for identification. You made a judgment based on my appearance and decided that was sufficient grounds to deny me service." Maya turned back to Palmer, who was still holding her ID card like evidence in a trial where he was both defendant and prosecutor. "Officer Palmer," Maya said, and her voice carried the tone she used when deposing hostile witnesses in corporate lawsuits. "Are you going to remove these handcuffs, or do you need me to file additional charges for unlawful detention?" Palmer's training finally kicked in through his shock. He fumbled for the keys to the handcuffs, his hands shaking so badly that he dropped them twice before successfully unlocking the restraints. The metal bracelets fell away from Maya's wrists, revealing angry red welts where they had cut into her skin. Maya brought her hands forward slowly, rubbing circulation back into her fingers while maintaining eye contact with Palmer. She didn't run. She didn't hide behind her newly revealed authority. She stood there 5 feet 6 inches of quiet dignity and let Palmer fully comprehend the enormity of what he had done. Ma'am Palmer started, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Maya repeated, and for the first time since the encounter began, genuine anger crept into her voice. You slammed my head into a metal counter without checking my identification. You allowed this gate agent to destroy my personal property and scatter my belongings across the floor. You arrested me on fabricated charges in front of hundreds of witnesses. Maya stepped closer to Palmer, and despite being nearly a foot shorter and 60 pounds lighter, her presence forced him to take a step backward. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Officer Palmer. That was a pattern of bias and excessive force that I have been documenting, investigating, and prosecuting for the past 3 years. And congratulations. You just became my star witness in proving that the problem is worse than anyone imagined. The jet bridge door burst open with a crash that made everyone in the gate area jump. Michael Brooks strode through like a man who had just watched his company's stock price collapse in real time, which was essentially what had happened. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from the board of directors, the media relations team, and legal counsel, all wanting to know how Skylink's chief legal officer had ended up handcuffed in their own terminal. Maya Brooks called out as he approached, his voice carrying across the crowded gate area. Several passengers recognized him from business magazine covers and airline commercials, and phones turned in his direction as people realized they were about to witness a confrontation between 2 of the most powerful people in commercial aviation. Michael, Maya replied, straightening her hoodie and attempting to restore some dignity to her appearance despite the circumstances. I think we have a problem. Brooks looked around the terminal, taking in the scattered contents of Maya's bag, the broken prescription bottle, the damaged laptop still emitting its security alert, and the crowd of passengers recording everything with obvious fascination. His expression grew darker with each detail. Officer Brooks said, turning to Palmer with the kind of controlled fury that came from 15 years of managing corporate crises. What exactly happened here? Palmer looked like a man caught between 2 freight trains approaching from opposite directions. He could lie and try to justify his actions, but dozens of witnesses and multiple recordings made that impossible. He could tell the truth and admit to assaulting a passenger without cause, but that guaranteed criminal charges and civil liability. Or he could attempt to find some middle ground that might salvage his career, which was what his panicking mind decided to pursue. Sir Palmer began, his voice gaining strength as he tried to reassert control over the narrative your employee was causing a disturbance at the gate. She refused to follow boarding procedures, became argumentative with staff, and appeared to be attempting to board the aircraft without proper documentation. Without proper documentation, Brooks repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Yes, sir, Palmer continued, encouraged by what he interpreted as support. The gate agent flagged her as a security concern, and when I attempted to investigate, she became resistant and made threatening statements. Brooks turned to look at Maya, who was standing quietly with her arms crossed, waiting to see how far Palmer would dig himself into the hole of his own making. Maya Brooks said conversationally, "What kind of documentation were you carrying today?" "The usual," Maya replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Driver's license, corporate ID, credit cards, first-class boarding pass for seat 1A, and my global entry card for expedited customs processing, all of which Officer Palmer refused to examine until after he had already arrested me." Brooks nodded slowly, then turned back to Palmer. "Officer, what was threatening about Ms. Williams asking you to check her identification?" Palmer's confidence began to evaporate as he realized that Brooks wasn't looking for justification for his actions. He was looking for rope to hang him with. She said it would be a mistake to arrest her. Palmer stammered. That sounded like a threat to me. A threat. Brooks's eyebrows rose. Or a warning from someone who knew exactly what the consequences would be for assaulting a senior airline executive without cause. The question hung in the air like a sword, and Palmer finally understood that he wasn't going to talk his way out of this situation. Brooks wasn't some random passenger he could intimidate or manipulate. This was Maya's boss, her colleague, and quite possibly her friend, and he had just watched his chief legal counsel get brutalized by airport security for the crime of wearing comfortable clothes. Sir Palmer tried one more time. I was just doing my job. The gate agent called for security assistance, and I responded according to protocol. Protocol. Maya spoke up for the first time since Brooks had arrived. What protocol requires arresting passengers without checking their identification? What protocol authorizes destroying prescription medication? What protocol permits racial profiling as grounds for denying boarding? Palmer had no answer because there was no protocol that justified anything he had done. He had acted on bias, escalated through intimidation, and doubled down through pride. And now he was facing the consequences in front of a crowd of witnesses, a dozen cameras, and the two people who had the power to destroy his career and his future. Maya Brooks said, his voice softening, as he addressed his colleague. Do you need medical attention? Should we call an ambulance? My shoulder is dislocated, Maya replied clinically, and my ACL repair feels strained from when Officer Palmer kicked my legs apart. But the real damage isn't physical, Michael. It's to Skylink's reputation. We have hundreds of people watching our employees commit federal civil rights violations in our own terminal. Brooks nodded grimly. We'll fix that. All of it. He turned back to Palmer, and his expression returned to the cold calculation of a CEO who had just watched his company become liable for millions in damages. Officer Palmer Brooks said formally, You are no longer welcome in any Skylink facility. Your security contractor agreement is terminated effective immediately. And if I see you within 50 feet of any Skylink employee or aircraft ever again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Palmer's face went white. Losing his airport security contract didn't just mean losing this job. It meant being blacklisted from security work at any major transportation hub in the region. Airlines talked to each other, and word would spread quickly that Palmer was the cop who assaulted an executive. You can't do that, Palmer protested weakly. Actually, Maya said, speaking with the authority of someone who had written the contracts Palmer was disputing, we can. Section 12 of your agreement states that Skylink reserves the right to terminate for cause without notice. Assaulting our executives definitely qualifies as cause. Maya looked around the terminal at the crowd of passengers, still recording, still watching, still waiting to see how this confrontation would resolve. But that's the least of your problems, Officer Palmer, Maya continued. Because in about 10 minutes, Captain Ramirez from Airport Security is going to arrive with a warrant for your arrest on federal civil rights violations. And after that, you're going to spend the next several years of your life explaining to juries why you thought it was appropriate to assault an innocent woman for the crime of wearing a hoodie while black. Palmer looked around desperately as if seeking some escape route from the consequences of his actions. But the circle of witnesses had grown larger, not smaller. The phones were still recording. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. And Maya Williams, the woman he had dismissed as a nobody trying to sneak into first class, was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Captain Ramirez arrived at Gate B-12 looking like a man who had been called away from his daughter's birthday party to handle the worst crisis of his 20-year career. He was accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a representative from the Port Authority's Internal Affairs Division, all of them moving with the grim efficiency of people who knew they were about to arrest one of their own. Elena's TikTok livestream had now reached over 50,000 concurrent viewers, and she was providing running commentary as the airport officials approached Palmer with obvious purpose. Guys, this is about to get serious, Elena whispered to her camera. These aren't just regular security guards. That's the airport police captain, and he looks like he's here to make arrests. Captain Ramirez stopped directly in front of Palmer, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had spent the previous 30 minutes reviewing security footage that made his department look incompetent at best and criminally negligent at worst. Palmer Ramirez said, his voice cutting through the terminal noise like a blade. Badge. Gun. Radio. Now. Palmer's face went through several different expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, denial, anger, and finally the hollow acceptance of someone watching his career end in real time. He unbuckled his duty belt with shaking hands and placed it on the counter next to Maya's scattered belongings. Captain Palmer started, "I can explain." "Save it for your lawyer." Ramirez interrupted. "Derek Palmer, you are under arrest for assault under color of law, violation of civil rights, and deprivation of constitutional protections. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." The Miranda rights echoed through the terminal with the finality of a funeral bell, and Palmer's legs nearly gave out as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The same restraints he had placed on Maya less than an hour ago were now securing him for transport to a holding cell where he would wait to be processed on federal charges. Maya watched Palmer's arrest with the satisfaction of someone who had spent 3 years building cases against exactly this kind of abuse of power. But her attention was primarily focused on Jessica, who was still standing behind the gate counter looking like she was about to either faint or throw up. "Jessica," Maya said, stepping toward the counter with the calm authority of someone who had just watched her attacker get handcuffed. "We need to talk." "I don't have anything to say to you," Jessica replied, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at Palmer being led away by airport police while trying to process the reality that her decision to call security had just destroyed 2 careers instead of 1. "Actually, you do," Maya corrected. "You're going to explain to me why you felt comfortable using racial profiling as airline policy. You're going to tell me how many other passengers you've denied service based on their appearance. And you're going to help me understand how someone who works for an airline managed to miss 18 months of mandatory bias training." Jessica's face crumpled. The defiance that had carried her through the initial confrontation was gone, replaced by the crushing realization that she had picked a fight with the wrong person at the worst possible time in front of the largest possible audience. "I was just doing my job." Jessica sobbed the words coming out in gasps between tears. "I was trying to protect the airline from fraud." "By assuming that black women can't afford first-class tickets?" Maya asked. "By refusing to scan a boarding pass because you thought I didn't fit your mental image of what our customers should look like." Maya stepped closer to the counter, close enough that Jessica had no choice but to look directly into her eyes. "Jessica, I wrote the customer service manual you're supposed to follow. I created the non-discrimination policies you just violated. I designed the training programs you obviously skipped. And now I'm going to personally ensure that you never work in customer service again." Brooks had been standing silently during Palmer's arrest, but now he stepped forward to address Jessica directly. "Ms. Martinez," Brooks said formally, "you are terminated for cause effective immediately. Your access to all Skylink products has been revoked. Your employee benefits are canceled, and you will be escorted from the premises by security within the next 10 minutes. Jessica looked around desperately as if hoping someone in the crowd might intervene on her behalf. But the passengers who had watched her humiliate Maya now looked at her with undisguised contempt. Elena's live-stream chat was filled with comments calling for Jessica to face criminal charges alongside Palmer. "Please," Jessica begged. "I have a mortgage. I have bills. I need this job." "You should have thought about that before you decided that racial profiling was acceptable customer service," Maya replied without sympathy. "You had multiple opportunities to check my boarding pass, verify my identity, and treat me with basic human dignity. Instead, you chose to escalate a simple transaction into a federal civil rights violation." Security officers arrived to escort Jessica from the terminal, and she left the same way Palmer had. in restraints facing criminal charges, and with her professional future permanently destroyed. Maya finally allowed herself to survey the complete wreckage of the situation. Her belongings were scattered across the airport floor, her prescription medication was destroyed, her laptop was damaged, and her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. But she was free, vindicated, and surrounded by evidence that would make the resulting lawsuit the easiest victory of her legal career. "Ma'am," one of the airport officers approached Maya with obvious deference. "We need to document your injuries for the criminal case. Would you be willing to be examined by our medical staff?" Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had been live-streaming the incident on Instagram, stepped forward with her medical bag already in hand. "I'm an orthopedic surgeon," Dr. Mitchell said, showing her credentials to the officer. "I witnessed the entire assault, and I'd be happy to provide immediate medical evaluation and documentation for both criminal and civil proceedings." Maya nodded gratefully. "I'd appreciate that, Doctor Mitchell, and I'd like everything documented with photographs for evidence purposes." As Dr. Mitchell began examining Maya's injured shoulder and documenting the bruises on her wrists, Elena continued broadcasting to her now massive TikTok audience. "This is exactly what accountability looks like," Elena told her camera. "Two people thought they could abuse their power and humiliate an innocent woman, and now they're both facing federal charges. This is why we record everything. This is why we speak up when we see injustice." Elena's viewer count had stabilized at around 60,000, and her original video clips were being shared across every major social media platform. Major news outlets were reaching out for interviews, and JFK Justice was trending nationwide on Twitter. But Maya wasn't focused on the viral attention or the social media coverage. She was thinking about all the people who had faced similar treatment without the resources, connections, or legal knowledge to fight back. Palmer and Jessica were just two individuals, but they represented a much larger problem that required a much larger solution. Michael Maya said to Brooks as Dr. Mitchell finished her examination, "We need to talk about this publicly. This can't be handled with quiet settlements and internal policy changes. People need to see that accountability is real." Brooks nodded grimly. "Whatever you need, press conference. Congressional testimony, whatever it takes. This ends now." Maya looked around the terminal at the crowd of passengers who were still recording, still watching, still waiting to see how this story would conclude. She thought about her father, who had died face down on asphalt 26 years ago with no witnesses, no cameras, and no justice. She thought about all the people who had been humiliated, assaulted, and dismissed by people in positions of authority who believed their uniforms made them immune to consequences. "Actually," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the gate area, "I think I'll start right now." Maya walked to the center of the terminal space, positioning herself where all the cameras could capture her clearly. Elena immediately adjusted her live stream angle to ensure Maya would be perfectly framed for her audience. "My name is Maya Williams." She began, her voice strong and clear despite her injuries. "I am the Chief Legal Counsel for Skylink Airlines, and I was just assaulted, arrested, and humiliated by airport security for the crime of trying to board a flight while wearing comfortable clothes and having dark skin." The terminal fell completely silent, except for the soft whirring of camera phones recording what everyone understood would become a historic moment. "But this isn't really about me," Maya continued. "This is about every person who has ever been profiled, dismissed, or brutalized by people who abuse the tiny bit of power their positions give them. This is about creating a world where your dignity isn't determined by how much your clothes cost or what color your skin is." Maya paused, looking directly into Elena's camera, and knowing that her words were being broadcast live to tens of thousands of viewers. Officer Palmer and gate agent Jessica Martinez made the mistake of thinking that their bias would be protected by their uniforms and positions. They were wrong. and the federal civil rights lawsuit I'm filing tomorrow morning will ensure that everyone understands exactly how wrong they were." The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause, and Elena's chat exploded with supportive messages and promises to share Maya's statement across every platform available. Maya Williams had entered Terminal 5 as a tired lawyer hoping for a quiet flight home. She was leaving as the symbol of accountability in an age where justice was often delayed, denied, or ignored entirely. And Palmer and Jessica were learning that sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person who has the power to change your life forever. 6 months later, Maya Williams stood at the same gate where her life had changed forever, but this time she was there by choice rather than necessity. The terminal looked exactly the same. Same gray carpeting, same uncomfortable chairs, same departure board announcing delays. But everything else had fundamentally changed. The gate agent who greeted her was Maria Santos, a bilingual customer service specialist who had been hired as part of Skylink's complete overhaul of their ground operations team. Maria recognized Maya immediately, not because of her executive status, but because Maya's photograph was now prominently displayed in every Skylink break room as part of the Dignity in Travel training program that had become mandatory for every employee. "Good afternoon, Ms. Williams," Maria said with genuine warmth, scanning Maya's boarding pass with professional efficiency. "Seat 1A is ready for you. Thank you for flying Skylink." Maya smiled, appreciating the simple courtesy that should have been routine, but had required a federal lawsuit and congressional testimony to guarantee. "Thank you, Maria. I appreciate your professionalism." As Maya walked toward the jet bridge, she passed a large electronic display that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. It showed the passenger Bill of Rights in both English and Spanish, along with a QR code that linked to a reporting facility for discrimination complaints. The display was part of new federal legislation that Maya had helped draft after her testimony before the House Transportation Committee had gone viral and sparked national conversations about bias in air travel. The changes at Skylink were dramatic, but represented just the beginning of industry-wide transformation. Maya's civil rights lawsuit had resulted in a $12.3 million settlement, with the money being used to establish the Fair Skies Foundation that provided legal assistance to travelers who faced discrimination. The foundation had already handled over 200 cases in its first 6 months, and airlines across the country were quietly settling complaints rather than face the kind of public exposure that had destroyed Palmer and Jessica. Palmer himself was serving an 18-month federal sentence for civil rights violations, and his conviction had triggered a Department of Justice review of law enforcement practices at major transportation hubs nationwide. The review had uncovered patterns of bias and excessive force that led to policy changes, retraining requirements, and early retirement for officers whose disciplinary records showed they couldn't adapt to new accountability standards. Jessica had been charged with destruction of property and filing false police reports, receiving 2 years of probation and a permanent ban from working in customer service roles at any transportation facility. She had become the subject of multiple case studies in business ethics courses, and her name was now synonymous with the consequences of letting personal bias override professional responsibility. But Maya's focus wasn't on punishment. It was on prevention. The Dignity in Travel initiative she had created was being implemented at airports, bus stations, and train terminals across the country. The program used real-time bias detection software, enhanced complaint reporting processes, and immediate intervention protocols to ensure that incidents like hers couldn't happen again without swift consequences. Elena Vasquez had parlayed her viral documentation of Maya's arrest into a career as a civil rights advocate and documentary filmmaker. Her follow-up videos tracking the legal proceedings and policy changes had been viewed over 10 million times, and she was now working on a feature-length documentary about bias in transportation systems. Elena's original TikTok video of Maya's arrest was being used in journalism schools as an example of how citizen reporting could drive social change. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had testified as an expert witness in Maya's lawsuit and had since become a vocal advocate for medical professionals to document suspected police brutality. Her Instagram live stream of Maya's arrest had been crucial evidence in the criminal case against Palmer, and she now traveled to medical conferences, teaching other physicians how to recognize and document excessive force injuries. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual careers and policy changes. Maya's story had inspired a new generation of lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens to document and challenge bias whenever they encountered it. Law schools were teaching courses on dignity litigation, using Maya's case as a primary example. Business schools were analyzing Skylink's response as a model for how companies should handle discrimination crises. Most significantly, the story had changed how people thought about bystander intervention. The passengers who had recorded Maya's arrest but initially failed to intervene had become part of a national conversation about the moral obligation to act when witnessing injustice. Several had testified in the criminal trial against Palmer, expressing regret for not speaking up sooner, but ultimately providing crucial witness testimony that secured his conviction. Maya's book, The Price of Bias. A Lawyer's Journey from Handcuffs to Justice had become a bestseller and was required reading in civil rights law courses across the country. The book combined legal analysis with personal narrative showing how individual acts of discrimination connected to larger patterns of inequality that required both legal and social solutions. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. Maya had used the platform created by her arrest to honor her father's memory in ways that went beyond legal victories. The James Williams Memorial Scholarship, named for her father, provided full law school tuition for students from communities affected by police violence. The scholarship recipients were required to spend their first summer internships working with the Fair Skies Foundation, creating a pipeline of lawyers specifically trained to handle transportation discrimination cases. Maya had also reconciled with the trauma that had shaped her worldview since childhood. Watching Palmer face consequences for his actions had provided a sense of justice that her father's death had never received. The handcuffs that Palmer wore during his arrest were the same model that had restrained Maya, and seeing them used to hold an abuser accountable rather than an innocent victim had been powerfully healing. Today, Maya was flying to Los Angeles for the opening of the Fair Skies Foundation's West Coast office, but she was also traveling to meet with the family of a passenger who had been discriminated against at LAX. The Foundation's rapid response team had documented the incident within hours, and Skylink's new protocols had resulted in immediate intervention and resolution. The passenger had been upgraded to first class. The responsible employee had been immediately suspended, and the incident had been used as a training case for other staff members. As Maya settled into Seat 1A, she reflected on how much had changed since her last flight on this route. The seat was the same, but the world around it was fundamentally different. Airport security officers now wore body cameras that automatically activated during passenger interactions. Gate agents received monthly bias training and were evaluated on customer treatment metrics. Passengers had multiple ways to report discrimination that guaranteed investigation and response. The flight attendant who brought Maya her pre-flight beverage was James Torres, a former business traveler who had witnessed her arrest and subsequently quit his corporate job to work in the airline industry specifically to help ensure such incidents never happened again. James had been one of dozens of passengers who had contacted Skylink after the incident to volunteer their services in creating more equitable travel experiences. Ms. Williams-James said quietly as he served her sparkling water, "I just wanted you to know that what you did changed my entire perspective on what it means to stand up for what's right. Thank you." Maya smiled, appreciating that her story had inspired people to make career changes that prioritized justice over comfort. Thank you, James. And thank you for deciding that witnessing injustice wasn't enough, that you needed to be part of preventing it. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya looked out the window at the terminal where her life had been transformed by 30 minutes of cruelty and bias. The building looked ordinary from this angle, just another piece of transportation infrastructure in one of the world's busiest airports. But inside those walls, fundamental changes were happening that would protect travelers for generations to come. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Elena 6 months later, and JFK Justice is still trending whenever there's a discrimination incident. Your story gave people permission to demand better. Thank you for showing us what dignity looks like. Maya typed back, thank you for showing the world what happened. Accountability requires witnesses, and you made sure the truth couldn't be hidden or ignored. The plane lifted off smoothly, carrying Maya toward her next destination in a fight for equality that would never really end, but had been fundamentally changed by her refusal to accept humiliation as the price of traveling while black. Below, Terminal 5 grew smaller until it was just another part of a city that had learned the difference between power and authority, between uniform and character, between badge and justice. Maya Williams had been handcuffed for asking to board a plane she had every right to catch. But those handcuffs had become the key to unlocking a future where dignity wasn't negotiable, bias wasn't tolerated, and justice wasn't just a word people used when it was convenient. The woman who had been arrested for wearing a hoodie while black had become the architect of a world where clothes didn't determine character appearance, didn't dictate worth, and quiet dignity could defeat the loudest prejudice. And somewhere in a federal prison, Derek Palmer was learning that the person you underestimate might just be the person who changes everything. Maya Williams had boarded her flight after all. Not just as a passenger, but as living proof that sometimes justice does wear a hoodie, and sometimes that hoodie is exactly what the world needs to see. The flight to Los Angeles was smooth, uneventful, and exactly what air travel should be: safe, professional, and dignified. Just the way Maya had always known it could be if people simply chose to treat each other with the respect that everyone deserved. Justice had finally learned to fly. If this story moved you the way it moved millions of others, we need your help to keep sharing these powerful messages. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story about justice, dignity, and standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to see that accountability is real and that quiet strength always defeats loud prejudice. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and share your own story if you've ever faced discrimination. Your voice matters, your story deserves to be heard, and together we can build a world where everyone gets the respect they deserve. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you believe that dignity should never be negotiable. Until next time, stay strong, stand proud, and remember that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one they underestimate.